Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is Demolition Man.
It's Die Hard in a future shock satire. Phil?
Yes?
I've been meaning to say something to you for a while, and I couldn't find the words until I saw this film. And those words are, you're still addicted to the 20th century, high from its harshness, buzzed by its brutality.
Yes, I definitely felt seen and heard.
You felt seen
by
and heard in the movie.
Sandra Bullock's character in this film as someone that refuses to live in the current society where they exist and wants to escape to the 90s.
You know what I felt seen in, speaking of escape to the 90s, is the book written by our guest, Nick de Semlyen. The book is Last Action Heroes. He joined us to talk about Demolition Man. As you'll hear us say when we talk to him in a minute, I love this book. It's my favorite book of 2023. I've had people reach out to me about the book and said, have you read this book? We got sent galleys of the book. We got to read it early because we're cool podcasters. And it's so exciting that we have him on the show.
Yeah, it was just a crazy meeting of minds to have, Nick. I mean, this book is so in our wheelhouse. It is everything.
It's in our cryo prison.
It is. It's everything that we're interested in, right? About taking action movies seriously, about a fascination with some of the nostalgia of this time, about these iconic larger-than-life figures that were involved: Bruce Willis, Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Van Damme, Seagal, even Chuck Norris, Jackie Chan, some very, iconic titans of the genre. But what Nick unearths in his book is there's so much more to these people and to this time period than most people might be aware of. Even if you're like hardcore action movie junkies like us, it was so revelatory and so insightful and such a delightful, easy read, yet still a very substantive, important book about this time, clearly written by someone that has a deep love of action cinema. So we were thrilled to have him.
Well, he's also been writing at Empire for years and years, right? He's sort of
not only is he an incredible author, and he also wrote this other great book, Wild and Crazy Guys, about the comedy stars of the 80s. He's just, his day job is being the editor of one of the biggest movie magazines in the entire world, if not the biggest, Empire magazine. So it's an absolute coup to have him on, and yeah, we're excited to get into it with him.
Well, without further ado, let's go to our conversation with Nick de Semlyen.
Tell us about this book. What made you write it? What's it about? And why should our listeners go out and order a copy immediately, which we recommend that they do?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, let me quote the great man Jean-Claude Van Damme, the philosopher of our times, who described Universal Soldier as being 100% pure beef. And I'm pretty sure that's the closest, most accurate description of this book. It's about 8 very beefy men and the action movies that they wrought upon the world in the 80s and 90s. So it's Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Chuck Norris, Seagal, Van Damme, Dolph Lundgren, of course, Bruce Willis, and Jackie Chan. I think I got all of them. And yeah, I wrote Wild and Crazy Guys, which was my book about 80s comedy. And it was so much fun writing about that period. The 80s was that time in Hollywood where you got these very big, ebullient, wild, high concept movies in both comedy and action. And it was kind of like, it was fun writing about all the comedy titans, but the action guys, the stories are just unbelievable. So yeah, it was really the culmination of lots of interviews that I'd done for Empire over the years. Went to Shanghai and hung out with Jackie Chan and talked to Seagal, did a set visit for Schwarzenegger, Sabotage.
Well, one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to you specifically about this movie, Demolition Man, as it pertains to your book, and the Chuck Norris story sort of speak to that, the disparity between the screen persona and the man, and that's certainly the case with Sylvester Stallone as well. Like how he is on screen, how he's portrayed on screen, and perhaps how he's perceived by audiences actually has there's quite a significant disparity between how he is in real life. So with this film being a sort of satirical deconstruction of action movie archetypes to some extent, we thought it would be a very interesting film to get your perspective on, because, Stallone is kind of the central figure of the book, right? And you spent a lot of time with him. What's your reading of him and how that informs his role in this film and what he's kind of doing with his screen image?
Yeah, he was. So the book starts with Stallone. You're right. He's kind of the central him and Schwarzenegger, but I think especially Stallone go. And I think it's quite an amazing. And I learned a lot writing the book. Like I didn't know a lot of it going in, but he is a very complicated character. He's maybe the most interesting out of the 8 people to talk about because there's so much going on with him. Like he contains multitudes. Like he's this big hulking guy who makes dumb action movies. Some of them are dumb, some of them are smart, has an entourage, has a big ego, but then he's also very sensitive. He enjoys poetry and Edgar Allan Poe. Like there's so much going on. And he's really smart, he's really funny, but when he tries to be funny on screen, it doesn't work. Yeah, it's really interesting. Charting his arc through this time against Schwarzenegger's. Schwarzenegger is like a straight line. It's just everything he does works, which is why I wanted to end the book with him having a failure, because it was so unusual at that time for him to anything to go wrong. Whereas with Stallone, it's like flatlining. It's going up and down. And he's having these huge successes. And then the next year he'll have Rhinestone. And then he'll do the biggest movie of that next year. And then he'll do Oscar and Stop or My Mum Will Shoot. But just his career just was going all over the shop. And there's so much drama to just kind of charting it. Yeah, with Demolition Man, I think he was very sensitive about his image, especially. And he was resistant originally to the idea of kind of sending himself up or satirizing himself, but got talked into it and it worked out really well.
Yeah, we talked about how this is actually an interesting companion piece to Last Action Hero, which is also obviously, the title of your book, or Last Action Heroes. How this was almost taking place at a pivotal moment, right? We have the 80s, and I think you've said before in other interviews, and it's something that it's the whole pretext of our show, is that there's basically action movies before Die Hard and action movies after Die Hard. There is a gigantic paradigm shift from what they would call, literally in this movie, muscle-bound cavemen, muscle-bound grotesques, as they're called in this film. So by 1993, which is the year of Last Action Hero, Schwarzenegger playing with his screen image, basically trying to figure out where do we go in this sort of more self-aware 90s, where there has been a paradigm shift about what the action movie is perceived as, because Bruce Willis was this more vulnerable, more sensitive, more human figure that was driving, that suddenly created this new kind of model. It seemed to me that this film was using the mechanism of Future Shock, a Rip Van Winkle type story, someone being transposed into a different society, for Stallone to figure out, what do I do as a quote-unquote muscle-bound grotesque now that era is basically over? So that's why I thought this would be, a fascinating film to unpack. Do you have a favorite action movie of all time, Nick, as someone that's a real connoisseur?
I mean, it's down to Die Hard or T2. Like, it's one of those two, and it really just depends on which day. I saw T2, and I'm not talking about Trainspotting 2. I wonder if anyone calls that T2 still. But yeah, I saw... You do. It'll always be the true T2.
Yeah, I do.
Just you and Danny Boyle.
Exactly.
Yeah, T2 I saw younger. It really hit me. I remember the Game Boy game. I was talking to someone about the Game Boy game the other day. Like, how weird is it that there's a Terminator 2 Game Boy game and there was like a Navy SEALs one? And it was a big part of my formative years. Die Hard I didn't see till a while later. I wish I'd seen it earlier. Yeah, it's got to be one of those two because they got everything. They've got the action, but they've also got the comedy. They're both hilarious films. I just saw Die Hard at the weekend on the big screen with a packed out crowd, which was amazing. People laughing the whole way through it in a good way, not laughing at it. That's happened the weekend before with Rambo too. Yeah, they just fuse action and comedy. They got so many ideas. They were revolutionary. And they both, especially Die Hard, has that deep bench of characters. Like, there's probably 15 characters from that film I can quote. Like, how many films, whether action movies or not, can you quote 15 different characters? So,
yeah, there's every nuance of Die Hard has an entertainment value, even if it's the SWAT team guy pricking his hand on the road. What's your history with this particular film, with Demolition Man, Nick?
I mean, I saw it at the cinema when it came out. I immediately loved it. And I'm not really a Sly guy. Like, I was always an Arnold guy growing up. I've come to appreciate Sly much more. But yeah, this was, for me, probably my favorite Stallone movie when it came out. I was pretty young. I was like a young teenager. I just thought it was really clever. I really appreciated how funny it was, how kind of meta it is. I probably didn't get all of the satire, but it's really interesting. It's like a celebration of action movies, but by imagining a world where action movies don't exist and kind of showing that future to be quite a boring place. And so, yeah, the John Spartan character kind of symbolizes action movies. And, you know, Sandra Bullock is obviously us. She's like a fan. So there's a really fun dynamic.
Who wants to go
there.
back and stay in that world forever, which is why we do this show.
Exactly. Yeah. She enjoys Lethal Weapon 3 probably more than I do. Like, I don't have that poster on my wall.
Do you guys remember the Lethal Weapon 3 Game Boy game? Because that existed. I had it. It was not very good. You could play as Murtaugh or Riggs. And I just remember, like, in retrospect, it's like, oof, what a ridiculous fact that, like, a 13-year-old boy was playing a Game Boy game for Lethal Weapon 3. It's absolutely ridiculous.
That's amazing.
What's your history with this one, Liam?
Nick, partially because of your book, I've been going back and rewatching or seeing things for the first time. And so one of the things that I watched was Cobra. So I'm having a little bit of a Stallone-assance. So I rewatched this last night, and you know, we reference him too much on this show, but it's Verhoeven-esque, and anytime you can get some Verhoeven in a movie, I'm a very, very happy
It's
person.
very sharp satire. In addition to, that's a really good comp, actually, because it is quite RoboCop-like in the sense it's a sort of complicated, quasi-dystopian, although seemingly utopian future society with a lot of pointed comments to make about corporate America, about American society in general. That's a really interesting pull. That Verhoeven does come up every.
Yeah,
single
we just
time.
need to do Verhoeven cast. So, like, it just seems like an important that we have to talk about him. What's your relationship with this movie, Phil?
I saw it as a rental. I didn't see it when it came out. I loved it. It's been in my life pretty much since it came out. You know, this is like a regular watch for me. My wife loves it too, so it's one of the few ones. You know, she's still never watched Under Siege. I'm always trying to always fight in that battle, but this is one of the ones where she'll actually be, she'll watch Demolition Man with me. So it's something that I'm very much across. This wasn't like a new discovery for me. It's like I've always thought this film was awesome.
Yeah.
And to be clear, this film is fucking awesome. Like, it's brilliant as a science fiction film, as a satire, as an action movie, as a meta movie. It's doing so much. It's a straight Joel Silver, movie. It's got all of that vibe to it, all that muscularity to it.
Do you want to give us some facts?
Let's have some facts.
So Demolition Man was released on October the 8th, 1993 by Warner Brothers, which was 3 weeks after our last film, Striking Distance. We're now just over 5 years after Die Hard and obviously still feeling its aftershocks. It was directed by Marco Brambilla and produced by Joel Silver, Michael Levy, and Howard Kasanjian. Screenplay was written by Daniel Waters, Robert Reno, Peter M. Lenkov, from a story by Reno and Lenkov. And of course, it stars Sylvester Stallone, Wesley Snipes, Sandra Bullock, Nigel Hawthorne, Benjamin Bratt, and Dennis Leary. And on an estimated budget of $57 million, it grossed $159 million. So is certainly considered to be a solid hit for Stallone, who is kind of course-correcting his career in this year of 1993 with the double whammy of Cliffhanger, which we covered with Jamal Bowie, and this wonderful picture. So yeah, it's a hit. It was a hit. Now, in terms of concept, this film isn't a classic Die Hard scenario, but it does contain a very high amount of
Die Hard DNA. I had to. It's the Jurassic Park. It also needs to be referenced in every episode.
Yes, exactly.
I love it's a good sign when the guest laughs, because not every guest laughs. Some guests.
I got it straight away.
The tears
look
are
the
real.
other way.
Any Mr. DNA, I'm on board.
They're like, how did I get on this show with these two idiots?
So now, Nick, you're the expert. So tell me if I'm missing anything. But this is the section where we look for specific connections to the OG Die Hard. So tell me if I'm missing anything. The ones that I caught were the fact, obviously, this is a Joel Silver production. It features the legendary Charles Picerni as a stunt coordinator. He pops up in all of these Joel Silver movies. He also appears briefly in Die Hard as the cop driving Dwayne T. Robinson. Oh. The movie begins with Grandel Bush flying in a helicopter over LA.
Yeah.
It's at the end of Die Hard, but it's at the beginning of this movie. We also have a British classically trained Shakespearean actor in a villainous role. We have a hero who is a rule-breaking maverick cop called John, who is effectively a one-man army.
They're always called John.
But an interesting kind of cyclical link because, Rambo inspired Die Hard, right? It was sort of often referred to when it was in development as Rambo in a building. This character is played by Rambo, and then Rambo is even referenced in the movie as it is in Die Hard. We sort of touched on that self-referentiality aspect. This like Die Hard, it also directly references Arnold Schwarzenegger, as Die Hard does too.
It totally changes the context, having read your book. Like, that moment is hilarious. It was funny before, but now having been steeped in that history, it's like, it's a great, great line. Like,
I love all the little jabs. Yeah, the
he's
little jabs.
president?
The Schwarzenegger library.
Also prophetic in some, like, incredible.
Yeah.
Then you've also got rooftop shootouts. You've got characters jumping from explosions. I don't know how you're Stallone. Like, I love doing my Stallone yell. If you ever feel compelled to do that, Nick, this is a safe
You got
place.
it down. I'll learn from the master.
Wait till you hear my Marco
I worked hard on
impression.
it. I was rehearsing
God.
constantly.
You didn't sleep last night.
I actually didn't, which is why I'm delirious. There's also an interesting class dimension in this film that Die Hard has, and this film has in spades. There's the haves and the have-nots. There is a literal underclass in Demolition Man. Die Hard has some pretty nifty class politics, class analysis. It's also highly critical of the police. LAPD, again, are portrayed as largely inept and foolish. And then the last shot, you sort of have the hero and leading lady leaving the chaotic scene, having achieved romantic unity, as the camera pans up to a burning, decimated building.
God, Phil, you are a poet. You are
on
a
face
poet.
value,
Listen to this.
You might think what's this got to do with Die Hard? But actually, under my action movie microscope, there were quite a few things that I caught. Did I miss anything, Nick, or any other? Anything
You had pretty much everything on my list, to be honest, down to the Grand L Bush thing, which I wasn't sure you were going to get. So well done there. There was only one other thing, because I watched Die Hard recently, and there's kind of the penthouse pet, the scene where there's two people making out in the office. I was listening to the commentary, and they say that was like Joel Silver said, you got to put a penthouse pet in there. And 100%. You see her topless briefly, and that happens again. I'd always forget this bit in Demolition Man, but when he does the wrong number call on the video screen, again, a topless woman, and according to the commentary, a penthouse pet. And they don't say on that, Marco Brambilla doesn't say, but I'm sure it was a Joel Silver. You got to put a bit of penthouse in. So I think
I thought that I was watching it last night, and I thought that is I bet 100% that is a Joel Silver note, because it's also it doesn't fit at all, because it's like, this is a sort of sexless society, right? Everyone's really repressed, and they're and they've literally just had a scene where they can't have sex physically, they have to do it virtually, and then randomly there's this nudity just shoehorned in there, and it's just like, that is such a note.
It feels like a Joel Silver note on every film, just the same note. You can just imagine the director getting it, going, "Oh God."
Yeah, the 13-year-old boys need to be like watching this on HBO late at night and recording it.
But to this movie's credit, it's smart because it shows you what actually happens in a repressive society. Like, that's why I like it a lot, right? Like, it's like people are still doing it. Just the cop who thinks she has to follow all the rules is not doing it, right? Like, it's just everything. The conceit of this is
I think you're giving Joel Silver
clever.
a lot of credit.
I'm not sure you thought it through this much. Maybe she was using the free seashells, and it requires, just romance.
Who knows?
All right, listen, I'm not going to be so nice, okay? The rules are going to change here, Phil.
Well, there's one last other thing that was not Die Hard DNA, but Die Hard with a Vengeance DNA, is that Simon Phoenix's catchphrase as well. He says Simon says a lot, which of course goes on to become a motif for the Simon Gruber, Jeremy Irons character in that movie. So that was another one that sort of was obviously 2 years ahead, but worth touching on. So we'll move on now to a section called Anatomy of an Action Movie, where we kind of break down, we get under the hood. So for anyone that hasn't seen the movie, I'm just going to summarize it very, very quickly. If you haven't, I don't know what you've been doing for the last 30 years, but in a dystopian, crime-ridden Los Angeles, renegade cop John Spartan, Stallone, apprehends his psychotic arch-nemesis Simon Phoenix, played by Wesley Snipes, during a chaotic assault. In the aftermath, Spartan is wrongly blamed for a large number of civilian deaths, and both men are placed in a new cryogenic penitentiary where they serve their sentences in suspended animation. So when they are both awakened 36 years later, Spartan and Phoenix find themselves in a new, peaceful and seemingly utopian society where they quickly resume their violent feud, exposing the sinister truth about this brave new world in the process. The ticking clock comes late in the third act when an emboldened Simon Phoenix starts the mass thawing of the cryo prison's most dangerous convicts, thus ushering in a new age of violence and anarchy, and it becomes up to Spartan to stop him before it's too late. So I want to sort of step back a little bit now and just let you guys cook on what do you think of this concept and the themes that are, I mean, just what are your general thoughts about the conceit of this movie and what it's trying to say and what it's exploring thematically?
Nick, I have a question that might kick this off, which is, did you speak to Marco Brambilla while you were writing the book much?
Yeah. Well, just the one time.
Mm-hmm.
I found out he's now kind of doing art installations. Who is he doing them with? He's doing them with someone interesting, and I can't remember who.
Well, he did. He's done a bunch. He worked with Marina Abramovich for a while, which is really interesting. And he directed Kanye West's Power video. So he's very interesting. Like he's really after this movie. He was like 26, 27 when this movie was made, and he's kind of completely gone in a different direction. And from, it can be hard to find a lot of information about artists in the world, but I do think that one thing that's interesting is this movie kind of like changed his career trajectory.
Yeah, he was one of these guys who came out of adverts, commercials to you guys, which is really interesting because I think Demolition Man has that flash that you kind of associate with guys coming who have been doing commercials, but it also has so much subtext. It's such a clever film. It's so dense and kind of packed with smart ideas and interesting, and just the whole technology side of it is fascinating. But I think the concept, just going back to the question, like the concept is fantastic. I think it's so simple. I watching it again the other day, I was a little less clear on the mechanic. It feels like they're working quite hard to set it up. Like I wasn't entirely sure what John Spartan was in trouble for, let alone being put in cryo for that long. Like it didn't seem like he'd really done anything wrong. So yeah, not sure about that, or why people are being frozen. I don't know if it made that 100% clear. Maybe it worked more for you guys.
I think it was
that
like
might be the Joel
fashionable
Silver
at the time,
of it, right?
Like, because I think I read one of the screenwriters, like this was a trend going on with celebrities. They were sort of prepping for their death by being cryogenically frozen, or it was sort of like a fad that was going on. So it was sort of in the zeitgeist, and it kind of found its way in there as a way to perhaps solve that idea of the Rip Van Winkle of a gigantic leap in time, and then and becoming into an entirely new society. So I think that's where some of that came from. But Stallone, he obviously has a bad reputation as the Demolition Man that causes a lot of collateral damage. But basically, Simon Phoenix is like, he did it, and the cops are like, oh, okay, we'll believe you, no problem. He's going down for manslaughter.
It seemed a bit harsh this time.
Years.
I think like when you're younger, you're just like, yeah, let's get the cool stuff started. But this time I was a bit like, I have a lot of questions in the first 5 minutes of this film, which it doesn't really answer. But I like how quickly it just gets to it.
Yeah.
I was so intrigued by the Brambilla of it because I watched this film, recently, and rewatching it recently, I had to stop a few times. And so I kept rewatching the scene when Phoenix breaks out of the penitentiary. And one thing that I kept thinking a little bit about was the first 10 minutes or 15 minutes of whatever is a classical 1990s, late 80s, early 1990s action scene. You've got Stallone like flying through the air, shooting guns. There's some John Woo stuff in there. Like it feels very much of a piece of this kind of action movie. And then we flash forward to 2032, and almost all of the violence that we see is on a screen. Like it's actually very unusual that like we're hearing them be like, we kind of see him take the eyeball out of Andre Grigori, which is just crazy that Andre Grigori
My Dinner with Andre.
is in this part. And he shares a credit on screen with Jesse Ventura. It's like the odd couple. Like it's totally bizarre. But so we see all this action through their eyes, and it got me thinking a little bit like what are sort of like some of the like high level references here. And I actually thought a lot about The Matrix, like which obviously is going to come a few years later, and how it's influenced by the philosopher Baudrillard, who basically said like we're living in a simulation. As we become more desensitized, like we're going to become less connected to one another. And it's like it's a pretty like philosophical idea, but Brambilla is really intrigued by this, and his career post Demolition Man is really into some of these like more I would say to some extent, esoteric philosophical ideas that have become much more mainstream. Like, they're not experiencing the violence, they're watching it on a screen. And of course, then with the escape of this convict and this cop, the violence spills out into the streets. But I'm really intrigued by this idea that he sets up early, that everything is sanitized and all we're doing is absorbing violence on screens all the time, which feels like weirdly prophetic.
Really heady idea. That's really interesting about The Matrix. 'Cause I think you're right. Like, there's some really cerebral influences. And when I talked to Brambilla, he mentioned Kurt Vonnegut as one of the inspirations for, like, you know, the cryopenitentiary and some of the ideas there. There's a story called Ice 9 by Kurt Vonnegut. He also mentioned Jack Tutty's Playtime. So I just love the idea that you've got a Stallone action movie that the influences are so far away from that.
I love that. I just find that so exciting. And that's, you know, I think that the commentary, one of the things I love about this movie is the scene when Stallone's like, why am I fighting these guys who are just need to eat? Like, I find that that's really, you know, great. And I think this movie has weirdly been a lightning rod for the right in some ways, but there's some pretty interesting non-right leaning ideas in the movie. But there's this other level of, like, he's clearly interested in how we consume culture in like or how we consume violence and all these things in like in a society and in a future society, I should say, but also the fact that it's like still a kick-ass action movie, like, makes it extremely accessible and it feels ahead of its time in terms of how it portrays violence in that sense.
It's so dense. It's so dense. I think it really lends itself to rewatching because there's so much going on, and the little references. I watched it when I watched it this last time. There's a reference to the franchise wars when they're talking about Taco Bell winning the franchise wars, and you feel as if it's like a literal war that's kicked off, and all the fast food restaurants are fighting each other for supremacy. But if there's a feeling that they have really sat down and, well, probably not Joel Silver, but, you know, Brambilla and you know, certainly Daniel Waters, that they've sat down and they've thrashed out this whole world and what's happened, and it's really smart and interesting.
It feels so textured, doesn't it? It feels so thought through. When you do world building, you know, you really need to make sure that it's really buttoned up and that you got the details correct. The foundational elements need to be correct, but then all of the details of how this world works and what the governmental structures are, or, you know, all of those kind of nuances. I mean, one of the reasons I love this movie as well is, like, you know, one of the sort of reasons for doing this show is our thesis that who says action movies have to be dumb, right? Like, sure, I can enjoy a dumb action movie, and I don't think Cobra is full of trenchant insights about society and law and justice, even
it's got a robot in a fur coat. Doesn't need any of that stuff.
Guys, it's style is depth. Come on, let's be real. It's a movie about aesthetics. I'm sorry, I'll stop.
But this is it does have some very interesting things to say philosophically, socially, politically. I thought it was quite interesting that, and this was made in a different time, but it has an almost centrist point of view, especially at the end, where it's basically like there's the scraps who are the sort of, you know, the underclass who just want food but just want a kind of freedom, and then there's the sort of the fascist police force and the people that believed in the Cocteau philosophy on the other side, who are like very much fascist in their uniforms and everything else. And Spartan, as the mediator, basically says, you guys get a little dirty, you guys get a lot clean, and in the middle you'll figure it out. And apparently that came from Daniel Waters' own sort of centrist ideas. I think being a centrist in the 90s, we're in a very different world now politically, but I think that was quite an interesting. There's something to be said for the simplicity of that in a way, sort of, you know, about trying to meet somewhere in the middle.
It's even more complicated because, and I think this can lead us into our conversation of John Spartan, because he has my favorite line maybe of any action movie ever made, which is, the Wild West wasn't even the Wild West.
Yes.
Which
I thought you were going to say be fucked.
Will be that one.
That was second. That was a close second.
It's a tie, but, you know, the brainiac in me likes the Wild West wasn't the Wild West, but the 100% beef in me likes be fucked. So it's all,
what an amazing sort of
revisionist,
progressive interest. Like, you know, you could write essays about that one line. That is a very interesting and
in the Stallone
incongruous thing to say in a movie like this.
He's smart. He's actually, the movie starts him as this like caveman, but like he's obsessed with knitting because he's learned it when he's like in Cairo, and he's like, he becomes much more sensitive and much more nuanced than even the like classically trained British villain. Like, I think they do a good job of making Spartan, whose name is Spartan,
Yeah.
a lot more
No
interesting
accident.
than he has any right to be. And we could explore that line forever, but I just wanted to point it out as like pretty heady for a movie that is a lot of kiss, kiss, bang, bang.
To that point, let's get into let's move on to our hero section and talk about John Spartan, because to the Wild West thing, there is a line in it where Sandra Bullock's character, Lenina Huxley, says to him, and talking about action movie archetypes, and I want to quote this accurately, "I fleshed you out as some blow up the bad guy with a happy grin He-Man type, but now I realize you're the moody, troubled past gunslinger who only draws when he must type." So like what struck me about that was how Shane Black framed Lethal Weapon as a Western, was about a moody past gunslinger that was the only one that could solve this, that could kind of deal with these wild criminals, and he was despised and spat on and hated by polite society, but they have to dig him out and dust him off to deal with these bad guys. So I thought that was really interesting as and that another movie that seems to find its way into the conversation every single episode is Lethal Weapon.
The Western thing's really interesting though, because it's almost like reminds me of Once Upon a Time in the West, that this movie is kind of about progress. I think that's one of its big themes. And is progress always progress? Or does it take away something from us that we need? And the movie is kind of wrestling with those in the same way that I think a lot of Westerns do, because Westerns are about the old world and the new world and what's lost when you gain things. And in a weird way, I think Demolition Man is kind of is chewing those things over at the same time.
It's interesting you bring that up, because one thing that is said numerous times by various characters, I think particularly Snipes and Stallone, is "I'm history." And like on one level, that's like a great action movie quip, like "I'm history." But on the other level, it's like he literally is history. And he's like history in this sort of like struggle sense, where it's like we're trying to move away from this thing, but like maybe you need that thing, or maybe this like the edges being sanded off of a society create larger problems. It's very chilling that there's a line that's like abortion is illegal, but also so is getting pregnant. And you're just like, what is happening in this, this supposed utopia?
Yeah, it's gone very sterile. Lots of things have been outlawed. But yeah, they keep calling Stallone prehistoric, a dinosaur, like that Neanderthal. Like they keep saying it over and over again. And Nathaniel Hawthorne's always saying that to him. But yeah, it's like that's the fundamental question, I think, is being a dinosaur a bad thing, or is it a good thing? And I don't know. I don't know if it obviously comes down more on the side of saying that the old way is better. You've even got a car chase where you've got a future car versus like an old school car. But I think at the same time, the movie is satirizing the 80s and satirizing action movies. And so I don't think it's 100% on one side.
Yeah, I think a good thing about a satirizer, it's not like an equal opportunity offender, right? Like it's gonna poke fun. Like you can watch this movie and have your politics sort of, you can feel like it's meeting your political ideas, but like if you're really paying attention, there's a tension there that I think is really, really interesting. I'm like dying to wait till 2032 and like have this re-released, and I want to know what everyone thinks of it when it comes out then, and particularly what they think of Wesley Snipes as Simon Phoenix, because is this his best performance besides Willie Mays Hayes in Major League? What do we think?
I think it might be. It's definitely his most entertaining. Like I love him in White Men Can't Jump as well, and Blade. But yeah, I love Simon Phoenix, and it's interesting to what we were just talking about, that he kind of represents the future of what action heroes are going to become. He was just kind of hitting his peak then as an action star himself, and obviously represents more diversity. He's obviously a leaner guy than Stallone, and so yeah, it was Stallone at that period where he was quite insecure about these younger, slimmer guys kind of taking over. So you've got Snipes being outrageously entertaining, but then also representing that anxiety.
What I think is really interesting about Snipes' performance in this, compared to the other films that he did in this era, some of which we've talked about, such as Passenger 57, and another one that we haven't talked about, is not directly relevant, Boiling Point. He is so subdued in those movies. He is so introverted and kind of internal. And actually Drop Zone, he's quite like that too. It's really interesting that when he was the lead, it seemed with these action movies, he had to be, and Murder at 1600 as well, I think he's pretty kind of contained character, right? In this one, it's the total opposite. It's like he was completely unleashed when he was playing the antagonist to just go, but no, cuckoo. Just go absolutely go for it with such a fantastic performance. I think it's certainly his most vivid performance that he's ever done. And I'm a huge Snipes fan. I love him. And I think he's so talented. There's so many different things. As a dramatic actor, as a martial artist, as a comedy actor, he's so talented. But for me, this is like as good as it gets. He was just phenomenal in this.
It's also, I appreciate, to Nick's point sort of about like the dinosaur idea, that he has this line towards the end of the movie where he's like, you can't stop people from being assholes or behaving like assholes or whatever it is. And like, I appreciate when, similar to Die Hard, but in a very different way, they make the villain dimensional and thoughtful and have actual ideas. And boy, does the line, you can't stop people from being assholes, really resonate in 2022 with the few years that we've had. Like, it feels smart that he becomes more dimensional through the course of the movie.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, thinking back to Die Hard, he has great lines, but he is the anti-Gruber in terms of Gruber is very buttoned up and very elegant. And then you've got Simon Phoenix, who is he's like a cartoon character. He's like a Looney Tunes character unleashed in the middle of this movie. And it's quite hard to get right. I think you can think of a lot of action movies where the villain is like this guy who's yelling and making noise and being over the top. And sometimes it sinks the movie. But in this case, it works. And I think it's down to Snipes' charisma. And he brought a lot of the ideas in himself. I think that there's a scene where he speaks Spanish for no particular reason.
Oh, yeah.
That was his thing. He just started doing it in the rehearsal. But yeah, he's fantastic and gets as many good one-liners as Sly, I think.
Is Nigel Hawthorne like who plays Dr. Raymond
I called him
Cocteau?
Nathaniel Hawthorne. I've just realized that he's not Nathanial Hawthorne. Nigel Hawthorne. Yeah, I
you're
was
just
getting too
thinking
high
about
brow there.
early American literature. It's okay. It's
I
cool.
often am at this time of day.
Who isn't? Is he a big sort of... I don't know that I'm super familiar with him, but what are you guys' thoughts on him in this film? I think he has the right amount of screen time, and any longer it might stop working, in my opinion.
I mean, he's a legend in Britain, mainly for a combination of his stage work and Yes Minister, I would say, right, Nick? Like culturally, are they the main kind of tentpoles for him?
Yeah, there's a movie called The Madness of King George that was pretty big, and apparently I read that he only did Demolition Man so that he could get that film made. And I don't think he was a huge fan of Demolition Man when he was making it. He didn't realize quite how smart it was, maybe. Yeah, I mean, it works. I don't think he's the most memorable character in the film, but it works. You need a kind of supercilious British guy, and he delivers that. And he's obviously a great actor. But he's sometimes I forget he's in this film, to be honest.
You guys had a hard time in the late 80s and early 90s. It was like every bad guy was a British man. Thank you very much.
You had Bruce Payne in Passenger 57, right. Charles Dance in Last Action Hero, obviously Alan Rickman, all RSC Jeremy guys. Irons. Jeremy Irons will go on. To it goes on and on and on. This was
Stephen Burkoff.
Burkoff, and he was around even earlier with like Beverly Hills Cop. So it is, but I think what is interesting about this character is a good example of the principle that sometimes we talk about in screenwriting of the villain being the hero of their own movie idea. He wants to create a peaceful society free of crime and anarchy. And because of that prologue, which apparently came from Fred Decker, frequent Shane Black collaborator, uncredited, he was the one that basically said, you need to, if you're going to go to Oz, you need to have the contrast. We talked about this a little bit with Last Action Hero, which I think is also a sort of Wizard of Oz type story. But we needed to see the dystopia that ushered the utopia into existence, or because it's a false utopia. But of course, ultimately, this character is revealed to be, not unlike certain figures from real life and who are high up in the political sphere, as a fascist, a hypocrite, and a criminal himself.
I.e. a British guy in the early 90s.
Come for the jokes about action movies, stay for the trenchant historical politics. We love to hear it.
But let's talk about the action in this movie, because, this fundamentally it's a sci-fi action film first, and it works on that level, which in a way where I feel like Last Action Hero we talked about is a very interesting meta satire, although it's sort of messy and doesn't really work on a complete an action movie level. I don't think. We had that we kind of had that debate, but this film, in my opinion, does work in all of those different categories. It all kind of coalesces and it feels very cohesive. The action sequences in this movie. I'm just going to run through the ones that I highlighted, but I'm interested to get your assessment of how this works just purely on an action level. We've got that opening sequence in the abandoned building, which, as Paul Scheer said on How Did This Get Made, is when they did it, was the ending of an awesome movie that we didn't see. Is the beginning of this movie. You got that museum shootout, which is also quite witty, as well as being quite a fun kind of gun battle with the futuristic laser railgun. The car chase and the secure foam crash into the SAPD HQ, and then that final battle in the cryo prison. How do you guys rank this as like the action sequences and this as an action movie?
Well, I'm kind of siding with you, Phil, on Last Action Hero. Like, for me, Last Action Hero, the action. Sorry, Liam.
I'm leaving.
Some sanity,
storming out. I feel like the action and the plot kind of work against each other in that film a little bit, because it's not. For me, it's not entirely clear always what the stakes are, or how much of the comedy overpowers the action. So it's. Whereas in Demolition Man, I think that tonally it's so deft and they get it so right. And so every action scene is satisfying as an action scene, but then the comedy is kind of layered in quite smartly and subtly. I quite like the it starts with fire and ends with ice. That's quite cool. Again, another Die Hard connection, slight killing the bad guy with ice, where John McClane kills a guy with an icicle in Die Hard 2, and obviously Terminator 2. But yeah, I think the action's great. I don't know if there's like one standout, but I think for me, the museum scene just is elevated by the idea behind it. Like, it's a decent action scene, but it's the idea that there's a museum where all these action movie props are, and it's like violence itself is in a museum, and that's such a cool idea and cool concept to build an action scene around, that it really makes it memorable.
Yeah, it's sort of a perfect metaphor for the thematic ideas of the film, is to place this in a museum, the Museum of Violence, I think it's literally called. Yeah. And they have a battle in there, and outside of those four walls, it's like this seemingly peaceful utopia. Yeah, I agree. I think it's brilliant. And the fact that they're having a conversation during the shootout as well, it's very deft, as you say. It's very, very, it's really good writing and acting and really good direction.
We don't have conversations in action movies anymore. We have quips, right? And like, it's like this probably has a couple of good quips, but it feels like they're always arguing with each other, and it makes their relationship much more endearing, such as it is. Like the fact that they're kind of like a bickering couple whenever they're in a scene together. Like, I think that's
and they're yin and yang, aren't they? They sort of, it's fire and ice. They kind of complement each other in an interesting
one thing
way.
This movie weirdly made me think of, and I wonder if Christopher Nolan is a fan, is early on in the movie, Stallone says it takes a maniac to catch a maniac. And like that reverberates right to the scene in The Dark Knight when Joker's like, you need me. Like, they need each other.
Yeah,
in this
very
sense.
much so.
And I think it's also a little bit of a commentary that, like, depending on how you interpret it, the idea that like you need people that are insane to, do this kind of thing because no one in this society can. I would say that's one of the more like regressive ideas in the movie, but it also makes for kick-ass action, right? Like, it really is interesting that is kind of the thesis. That's like the first thing that Stallone says in the movie.
Well, Simon Phoenix is also a proto-supervillain, isn't he? I mean, and there's a point that I didn't pick up on with every watch, but they say that he has been enhanced during his cryo sentence, right? He's actually, his ability, he's been made to be stronger, and he has all of these extra abilities. So he is kind of a proto-supervillain. So yeah, I think that comparison's dead on.
Yeah, which is kind of an early Matrix idea as well, that they're kind of downloading all these skills into him while he's in cryo. But yeah, he is a bit jokery as well, Simon Phoenix. There's nothing in his pockets but knives and lint. He also has a great knife, which you see early on, and he doesn't really use it much, but it's got the skull on the top of it. But he's he feels like straight out of a superhero film.
And an anarchist like the Joker is, right? Just wants chaos. There's no sort of ideology behind. He's not trying to achieve anything. It's not like a Bond villain. He just wants anarchy. Should we talk about the humor? We touched on this a little bit, but it's interesting that, in my opinion, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Nick, as someone who's studied him and met with him, Stallone, he was unsuccessful at out-and-out comedy, right? As we talked about, Oscar, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. But yet when he blended comedy with action, as he does in this film and as he does in, say, like Tango and Cash, which I love, he is able to do it, and he's a genuinely funny guy. He's got a real nimble, deft touch. The knitting thing is so funny. He's poking fun at himself. He doesn't seem to mind being the butt of the joke. He's constantly the butt of the joke in this film. Why is it that he can do comedy so skillfully in this film, and then sort of failed so badly when he was doing out and out comedy in a way that Schwarzenegger was able to do with like Twins and Kindergarten Cop. What's your interpretation of that, Nick?
I think part of it is that the comedy is happening around him. So it's not just him, like if you watch Oscar, it's Stallone like doing a farce, and and it's got a slight air of desperation around it, and it doesn't work. Whereas with this, the world is inherently funny, the seashells, and it's more his reactions to things, and they're very small little moments, but it's not putting all the comedy on his shoulders. So I think you like him because it's such an absurd, ridiculously politically correct world that he's inhabiting, that you're kind of on his side. You're seeing the world through his eyes, and so he's a very relatable guy. And he's just reacting like we would react. Like he's not doing a lot of comedy routines. He's not doing Jim Carrey, but he does it very, very well. And but he's really likable in this film. It's interesting, you mentioned Cobra earlier. They're both, films set on the West Coast with him playing a cop, but you can't relate or like that character at all. But in this, he's like the everyman, which is quite unusual.
I cut my pizza with scissors.
Your frozen pizza.
Yeah. And then watch a Toys R Us commercial while cleaning my gun. It's totally relatable.
All right, but moving on. I think one thing that is interesting to your point, Nick, is I think that like these guys worked really well when they sort of do the monolithic thing that they're really good at. Like Schwarzenegger is earnest. Like his comedy comes from being like an earnest guy. Like it's like he's saying his one-liners, but he means them. They don't have like the hint of irony, and so therefore they're funny. Whereas with Stallone, it's like he's just playing the straight man, right? Like he's sort of the Jerry Seinfeld to the kooks around him kind of character. Like he has that sort of like, what's going on here? Like, and he just plays that, and it's really funny, as opposed to, and Phil, we need to talk about you saying you like Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, but when he leans into the comedy.
I don't like it. What are you talking about?
I thought you just said you liked it.
What, are you having a laugh?
But podcast divorce.
I saw the trailer and I was like,
you've never seen Stop or My Mom?
No,
get out of
let's
here.
not waste any time.
I thought you liked Sylvester Stallone. No, yeah, he's just a straight man, and it works really well.
But he has a good sense of comic timing in this.
Yeah. I was just going to say Twins is the one film where you see Schwarzenegger's orgasm face, and this is the one film where you see Sly's O face, which I'd forgotten about, that sex scene where you're just getting his reaction. It made me feel quite uncomfortable. But I think it's just he's got quite a laid back, not in the action scenes, but when he's just walking around San Angeles, like he's got that laid back kind of chilled vibe to him, and it's a very relaxed performance. Like it doesn't feel like he's trying too hard or anything. And I think maybe that helps that it was like such an ensemble, like in the same way Die Hard was a real ensemble, that it doesn't all fall on him to power the whole thing.
There's very funny comedic performers around him. One in particular that we should talk about now as we move on to our section about the leading lady of this picture, Sandra Bullock as Lenina Huxley. What a performance.
Amazing.
Like, and her energy, such a perfect compliment. The sort of, she has such a breezy charm. She's so endearing and likable from the moment we meet her. She's so funny when she, we're constantly misquote. That could be a real hackneyed gag. She's constantly misquoting common phrases. Funnily enough, something that also happens in Last Action Hero with the gangster character played by Anthony Quinn. And it's not particularly funny in that, but in this, the way that she does it with these, mistakes is one of the things she says were like, you really licked his ass instead of you really kicked his, like,
what is the
and she does it with such innocence.
What does she say
let's go
about
blow this guy, and because she's so sort
so
of
stupid
innocent,
and so funny.
These are like that's not like brilliant writing necessarily, but in the hands, in her capable hands, it's delightful. I think she is incredible in this movie, and what she does she makes it look effortless, but I think it requires a lot of dexterity and skill. And Nick, I think I'm right in saying that this was recast, right? It was originally Laurie Petty. Was supposed to play this role, and I think maybe did a little shooting.
Filmed one scene. It was the scene where John goes back to her apartment just before they don't have sex.
VR
that
sex?
Scene. Yeah, have the VR sex but that was shot, and then it was felt that she didn't have sufficient chemistry with Sly, so they fired her, and she later said that was the worst day she ever had. Was getting fired from this film quite quickly. So Sandra Bullock was drafted in, but she's perfect. She's like a blast of sunshine.
Yeah.
In the same way she is in Speed. You know, she's kind of supporting quite a straight-faced action hero, and just bringing that comedy and that likability and everything. But yeah, she's absolutely fantastic in this film.
It's a very vibrant performance. All of her performances are like that.
Yeah.
You know, she's just so alive, and it's really exciting to watch. And she gives credibility because she makes us understand the world that we're in, like in a way, like the way she explains it and she talks about it. I feel very like, oh, okay, like I understand where we are, because it comes a little later in the movie. But when she explains it, you feel like you're really.
She kind of grounds it.
Yeah.
An absurd world in a way that you can kind of, she sort of walks us through this absurd world in a way that's goes, oh yeah, this kind of does hold, kind of hangs together, as silly and surreal as it is. But yeah, what a performance. She's amazing.
So, all right, let's put on our futuristic tuxedos. What is the thing he's wearing at the Taco Bell? It's a Mortal Kombat robe. Like, I don't understand.
Well, it shows off the guns, doesn't it?
Oh,
it
does show off the guns.
You know.
He's very fit, but it's a ridiculous. I just said Stallone was fit, in case you guys were wondering. Stallone's pretty fit.
He brought that to set himself.
That is brand new
information.
So let's put on our weird Mortal Kombat fit vests for our section. The Die Hard Oscars, aka the Action Movie Awards, where Phil, will you list the nominees for the various awards, and Nick and I can grant Oscars, Die Hard Oscars?
Yeah, so you cast your votes for the following nominees for the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line, and also please feel free to add any that I've missed, because this is actually full of them. This is Zinger City. Send a maniac to catch a maniac. Followed by like the gear change or whatever, like just to button it, said by John Spartan. That kind of summarizes the thrust of the film, if not necessarily the theme of it. But great line. I'm a big fan of Mellow Greetings, sir. What seems to be your boggle?
Yeah, I've started
said
saying
by
that
the museum
to everybody.
patron to Phoenix. I also rather enjoyed, we're police officers. We're not trained to handle this kind of violence, which was said by Irwin, played by Rob Schneider. Those are the three that I picked, but I could go on all day. Were there any of those that you guys particularly loved, or ones that you want to throw into the mix?
I think my pick is the Wild West wasn't even the Wild West. I just love that line. I think it's incredibly smart and great. That's my pick. Nick?
Good choice.
I'll take Be Fucked. No.
I love it. The dialectic. It's alive.
Yeah,
it's alive.
It just makes me laugh. But no, I'm going to go with What's Your Boggle, because I say that in conversation still. And not many action one-liners have kind of permeated my vocab as much as that. But
and Be Fucked. I've heard you say that quite a lot.
I'm going to start saying that, yeah, in issue meetings. Yeah, I kind of love that they've come up with all these amazing bits of future speak that are actually fun to say and just absolutely ridiculous and funny.
Enhance your calm is another one that I keep kind of saying and stuff. Something I certainly need to do in my life. Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. A few interesting nominees for this category. Wesley Snipes as Simon Phoenix, Sandra Bullock as Lenina Huxley, Benjamin Bratt, who we haven't talked about, as Alfredo Garcia, who is sort of kind of the sidekick or partner to Sandra Bullock's character in the San Angeles Police Department, and Dennis Leary as Edgar Friendly. So those are my picks. Do you guys have a vote for who stole this movie?
For me, it's got to be Jack Black as Wasteland Scrap number 2. If you guys spotted Jack Black on this go-round, he's got
that is Jack Black.
Very small role. Unclear how he ended up living in the sewers under San Angeles, but he's great. No, my honest answer is going to be Bob Gunton. No, it's going to be Wesley Snipes. I mean, the man, what more does he have to do to steal a film than what he does here? I mean, he steals it and then returns it and then steals it a second time. It's incredible.
100%. That's the answer. Benjamin Bratt, also great. I love that he becomes radicalized. I think that's really fun in the movie.
For me, it's Sandra Bullock. You know, sorry to go against the grain, but I just think she goes on to parlay this into Speed and then becomes an absolute superstar. So I think she's spectacular in this film. The Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie. Our nominees are, and you just mentioned him, Chief George Earl, played by Bob Gunton, who during the course of the film calls Stallone's character caveman, savage, Neanderthal, primate, muscle-bound, grotesque. It's basically every single line is a really personal insult. Then we've got Associate Bob, played by Glenn Shaddix.
Oh, he's great.
Big fan of Laura Harris as the rude Taco Bell patron. And of course, Dr. Raymond Cocteau. Those are my 4 nominees for Dick of the Movie. Thoughts?
Associate Bob, because he's just so slimy.
Not the most, loyalty isn't his best quality.
Who's the guy who reams out John Spartan at the beginning after he's blown up the building?
Yeah.
Richard Donner's brother-in-law.
Yeah, that guy.
Steve Kahan.
Steve Kahan, yes. As seen in the Lethal Weapon movies.
Nice.
And
Cool.
I mean, he's responsible for the whole thing, right? Like, he that's a wild overreaction to put the man in ice for like 3 decades and destroy
There's
his
something you're
entire
forgetting
life.
called official police procedure.
Well, it's also very smart commentary to get the captain from Lethal Weapon to be an absurd version of the captain from, in this movie. Like, it's the first wink. Well, not the first, but one of the great early winks.
He's almost intentionally a stereotype in a way. In some way, that's a great shout. I'd go for Chief Earl personally, but good call. So our final category for the Oscars is the what is normally called the best death, but today should be called the best MDK, the best murder, death, kill.
The best extinguishing of light. Her light was extinguished by the big one.
Yeah. So I've got one of the moments that I love there's a lot of deaths in this film, but there's 3 that I've picked. I love, when Stallone goes in at the beginning and he's on that like bungee rope and he kind of just unclips it and then shoots someone. There's something so dynamic about that moment. It sort of sets this tone for like, wow, this film is just going for it straight out the gate. I love that action sequence and that moment in particular is just so great. Warden Smithers getting his eyeball removed and being left to die. And Simon Phoenix losing his head. Those are my 3 picks for best MDK. But if you have any to add, or please chuck them in.
Oh, there's some good ones. There's some good deaths. There aren't that many in this movie. I don't think it's got like a huge body count, but there's some.
Except for the 44 people on the bus.
Oh, but they were already dead. Dead.
That's true.
But yeah, I like it when, Simon finds a way around his programming and just gets one of his henchmen to kill.
Very RoboCop again, right? That moment.
Yeah. Any film where someone gets their head kicked off their body is probably going to win my vote.
Yeah,
and especially because they foreshadow it by, he's been, I like that John Spartan's been hanging on to that fort for like 30, however many years. He's like, because Simon says to him at the beginning, I'd lose my head if it wasn't attached. And he's like, I'm going to remember that. One day, I'm going to kick your head off, and then I can like do a callback to that.
The 90s were the best, guys. The 90s were the best.
It's a great death. And again, talk about sticking the landing, right? Like, there was the one flaw that I had with Under Siege, which otherwise I absolutely love, was like Tommy Lee Jones' death to me is a little blunt and inelegant compared to like the Gruber. But this one just absolutely, it's so, as you say, it was so well set up, it's so perfect, and it's so striking and visual. It really stays with you, that death. So yeah, for me, it's Simon Phoenix's best MDK for sure. We'll move on then to our final category, our final section of the show, which is the Double Jeopardy trivia quiz, where we're going to ask you three trivia questions. Would you want to go head to head against Liam or work together?
You want me to literally compete with a historian of action cinema? Thanks. That's very cool of you.
No, we're gonna collaborate.
Nick, what a gent, what a mensch.
Yeah,
what a mensch. All right,
John Spartan and whoever he collaborates with.
Lenina Huxley. No, not that one. Maybe that's not the right choice.
You can be Lenina Huxley.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, guys. So very simple. You get one clue if you want it. You can phone a friend. You can radio Al Powell, and I'll give you one clue. Question number 1. Which action movie megastar did Stallone originally pursue to play the role of Simon Phoenix?
I think I know this. Shall I go for it? Liam, do you have any thoughts on this?
Is it Jackie Chan?
It is indeed.
It's Jackie Chan.
So this was...
Yeah.
Can you elaborate, Nick, a little bit just briefly on the relationship between Chan and Stallone?
Yeah, so Jackie Chan, he had kind of given up on trying to break into Hollywood. I kind of chart this a bit in the book. He didn't know Stallone, but he suddenly got an invite to come to America and hang out with Stallone. And it turned out that Stallone was a big fan of Jackie Chan's Hong Kong films. And actually, on the set of Demolition Man, in his trailer, he had videotapes of like Police Story and Project A, and he would watch them to try and get ideas for the action scenes. And there's a reference to Jackie Chan. Obviously, Sandra Bullock references Jackie Chan movies as the way she's learned to fight. Yeah, so Stallone did offer Jackie Chan the role, but Jackie Chan, as much as he loved Stallone, didn't want to play a bad guy. So he turned it down.
One of the many fascinating aspects of this book that was completely new to me, although I did know a little bit about it because the opening of Tango and Cash is like a homage to Police Story, right? So definitely there was a connection between those guys. Question number 2. In some overseas releases of this film, the Taco Bell references were changed to the name of which popular American restaurant chain?
I can definitely answer this because UK was one of them. So I've seen the Pizza Hut cut.
Yeah. Release the Pizza Hut cut.
But I believe that Pizza Hut is an upscale restaurant still to this day. So
wait,
I'm with
Taco
you.
Bell is not?
Some of my great memories.
Yeah, we do have Taco Bell now. We never used to, but there's
Congratulations,
one I pop into
I'm
near
happy
Baker
for
Street.
you
Thank
guys.
you. I often have a very disappointing Taco Bell at Baker Street.
Now, I actually one of my the last question was the Jack Black one, but unfortunately I have a backup piece in my
The
boot.
Derringer and the shoe.
So I had to break in case of emergency break glass. So this is my backup tiebreaker question. This is a toughie. Which actress, known largely for her many collaborations with John Carpenter, provided the voice of the computer in this film?
Wow.
Is it Jamie Lee Curtis?
That seems
It is
too
not,
easy.
although I
just
see
too
why
easy.
you would think that.
Hmm.
Do you want to call Al?
Yeah, I think we should take the call.
All right. Al
Hey,
Pal standing
cowboy.
by. This actress was once married to John Carpenter and starred in several films he directed, including The Fog and Escape from New York.
Oh, man.
I'm still at a loss. I got to say it. I haven't seen The
It's,
Fog in a while.
It's
Is it?
Adrienne Barbeau,
Wow.
who also provided the voice for the computer in John Carpenter's The Thing. That was a toughie, as I say. I was going to go. The Jack Black one was my was the one I was going to do. So
That's a good
I'm sorry,
fact.
that was
That's a
pretty
good fact.
hard.
Yeah, I'm going to regale people with that this evening. I'm going to... It's my new go-to fact. It's my new
So-
conversation starter.
Guys,
Yeah.
this has been a delight. It's been amazing to
thank
have
you,
you,
Nick.
Nick. What
Thank
else
you,
do you want to
guys.
tell people about the book? It's out now, right, in the UK and the US. Where can people get it? Anything else you want to tell us about the
Yeah, just that it's out. It's out. There's an audio version read by Bronson Pinchot, which I'm very happy about. I love him. And there's a bit in the book that references Eddie Murphy and Beverly Hills Cop. And so just having Serge read that is mind-blowing to me.
That is amazing.
amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
so yeah, I just had a listen to it the other day for the first time. Not the whole thing, because that would be horribly narcissistic, but I just had a listen to a snippet, and he does an amazing job. I'm really, really excited that he does that. But yeah, it's also available hardback and digital edition. There is a letterboxed list. Someone has kindly put together a list of all 381 films mentioned, including Basket Case Free, The Progeny. In case you were, if anyone
We're going to
can
be
make it
doing that
through-
next week.
Yeah, there we go. Next episode, yeah.
We're looking to lose listeners. That's our plan with the podcast.
There we go. Now it all makes sense why you've asked me on.
Oh, absolutely not.
What's going on with the latest issue of Empire as well? What's cooking in that?
Our new issue is out. Well, it'll be now. I think when people listen to this, it's got June Part 2 on the cover. We revealed it just after they announced it was going back to March next year, the film. But we have a big interview with Denis Villeneuve and a few other people
great.
involved in the film. And we got 2 covers showing off all the characters. And yeah, that's a really, really good piece. So I recommend people check that out. Please do.
Nick, thank you genuinely for writing my favorite read of 2023. It's such a good book. It's such a great read. It's such an easy read, but it's really meaningful and I think significant for people that grew up and shared these movies with their family and friends. And I think you've done a real service to movies and movie history. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just enjoying people talking about these movies, seeing that on social media and letting me know what they're watching. And, I wouldn't say these films have been forgotten, but there's not enough of them on the streaming services. And I don't think they get enough respect, a lot of them. And yeah, if it plays any small part in kind of getting people watching these movies and talking about them again, then, then I'd be very, very happy. But thank you. I really, really appreciate what you guys said.
Of course. Thanks for coming on.
So the book is The Last Action Heroes. Where can people find you on social media, Nick?
I'm on, keep wanting to say Twitter. It's not Twitter anymore. It's on X. You'll find me Xing. Exiting? What's the verb? I'm
Exiting,
exiting.
maybe
I'm often,
exiting.
Yeah. I might be exiting X, but I'm still on there for now. I'm technically on Threads and I'm on Instagram, and it's all just my name, Nick de Semlyen.
Great. Thank you, Nick de Semlyen. Great guy, great book. We could go on about it forever, but we won't. We'll shut up now. It was great to have him on the show. And it's great to have you, listener, listening to the show. And if you like the show, you got to rate the show. You got to review the show. In fact, Phil, we just got a review that I wanted to share. We got 2 recently that were really great. And of course, I don't have those open. So will you please stall while I open them up? Hold on.
I can provide a short anecdote to fill this time, which you may feel free to cut out. But my dad watched Tenet on Netflix, which is on in the UK and Netflix. And as only my dad could say, I now finally understand all that bollocks that you and Liam are going on about with we live in a twilight world.
That's kind of a review. That's kind of a review. I'll take it.
So shout out to my dad for keeping it real.
Yeah, that rules.
And we love Tenet, obviously.
I'll keep it. Okay. Here we go. We have 2 reviews. Let me share those with you. The first one it's from Lutz Dude via Apple Podcasts. Great work, 5 stars. Nicely done deep dives into some of my favorite films. Keep up the great work, fellas. Thanks, Lutz Dude. You're the man.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
it's really
you.
nice.
That's great.
This one is great. This one is from AI80, so I hope that does not mean it's
AI.
I
of the
love
bots
podcasts.
that we had to write our reviews.
Podcast good. Very good. 5 stars. Consistently entertaining. I don't tend to indulge in podcasts that regular skirt the 90-minute mark. Ooh. But this is a very pleasant exception. Great banter, some great guests too. Hopefully there are enough diehard ripoffs to sustain this baby for a decade at least. Thank you, AI80, and I hope you're not a robot.
Thank you. And there definitely is plenty more to come. There are a ton
and they're going to keep showing up.
Die Hard.
Plus, when that ends, we can do our Tenet minute by minute deep dive. Phil, are you on X these days?
Yes.
Very, very. Are you thinking of exiting? How are you feeling about it?
You know, it's so sad because I've just finally, I was never that involved with it. And now I've just met this amazing community of film fans, cinephiles, and like-minded people just bantering about all these movies that we love. And then at the same time, it's rapidly turning into a bit of a garbage fire.
But what's your
still
handle?
there.
If I wanted to say send you a message, where would I do that?
You could do that at Philip Gawthorne. Very simple. Just my
Very
name.
simple.
Philip with one L. Gawthorne
I'm
with
at
an E.
Liam G. Billingham on Twitter. There's also you can find me there. I'm also on Blue Sky, but I don't think anyone's actually on Blue Sky, but I am. It's my name. You can also follow Die Hard OAB to get updates on the show. That's both on Twitter and Instagram. Email us. We've gotten some great emails at diehardoab@gmail.com if you have thoughts on the show. You know, we'd be happy to answer questions about movies and thoughts on movies and things like that. So please do email us at diehardoab@gmail.com and we will... Well, guys, we want to talk to you. We want to talk to you. And the biggest thing you can do for us is if you have a friend that likes action movies, tell them about the show. That's how we grow our audience. We're doing a somewhat niche thing here. Tell your friends about Die Hard on a blank, please. Next time on the show, Phil.
It's this obscure, mumblecore independent movie called Speed.
It's Die Hard on a bus.
Can you believe it?
I can't believe we made it here.
Almost the quintessential Die Hard on a blank movie, an absolute storming classic. We are going to get under the hood of that bus, much like Keanu. We're going to get right up in there.
These things really go off the rails when we try to do.
The whole thing's off the rails.
The whole thing's off the rails. Thanks,
but
everybody.
We're doing Speed, and join us for that next week.
Looking forward to it. Bye, everybody. We'll be back next time with some new FBI guys, I guess. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. Special thanks to Suki Chu. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.